Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Jenny Kanellopoulou, and I'm very happy to be chairing this session today on the very timely topic on Pride in Place, brought to you by the Regional Studies Association and the Institute of Place Management. It's, I think, our third collaborative lunchtime session. I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with the Regional Studies Association have been logged in. It is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional development and research, which supports its members with the latest funding, research, networking, and publishing opportunities. The Institute of Place Management, for those who might be unfamiliar, is the professional network that creates positive impact and transformation in places through place-based research, education, and knowledge exchange with a trusted and respected community of academics, students, practitioners, policy makers, and local and national level. And it is based at the Manchester Metropolitan University. This webinar today is being recorded and will be made available. You shall receive information by the RSA team shortly. The session today, Pride in Place, is very timely, as we explained, from a policy perspective, but we want to use today as an opportunity for researchers, academics, and practitioners to have a bird's eye view of Pride in Place, not only from a policy, but down to a research and methodological perspective. This is why we have a full lineup today that will talk you through all these specifics of Pride in Place. We will start our session today with Professor Cathy Parker from the Institute of Place Management, Manchester Metropolitan University, who will provide the umbrella term and the policy aims for Pride in Place and how the Institute of Place Management is and has been involved in one way or another in what we call today Pride in Place. And the presentation will be followed by Professor Rebecca Madgin from the University of Glasgow, who will take us one step forward by introducing place-based approaches and research through an HRC funding scheme that she has been leading at the University of Glasgow. And we will proceed with Dr. Chloe Steadman, Senior Lecturer at the Manchester Metropolitan University and the Institute of Place Management, who is going to talk about research methodologies and sensory ethnographic experiences for researching Pride in Place in particular. And we will finish off with Dr. Ilze Mertena from Manchester Metropolitan University, whose research focuses on the experience design and customer experience in independent high street businesses and how this feeds back to Pride in Place, bringing us from the broader to the specific way of approaching this very timely and engaging topic. We welcome you all today, and without further ado, we'll give the floor to Professor Cathy Parker. We'll not be interrupting the flow of this discussion apart from the very end when we will have our Q&A. So please, for Q&A and any questions to our speakers, use the question and answer function of Zoom rather than the chat. Q&A will be monitored throughout. Something might get lost in the chat room, so please redirect all your questions there. And we are very happy to start this lunchtime webinar.
Thanks, Jenny. Just getting my slides up there. Is Jenny, can you just confirm you can see that okay?
I can. I
Brilliant.
hope everybody else can.
Thank you. Yes, thanks. That's fantastic. That's a relief. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cathy Parker, as Jenny said. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation on Pride in Place, the policy. Tell you a little bit about it if you don't know, explain where it comes from in terms of its lineage from other policies, and the role of research or evidence in its effectiveness, which is particularly relevant, I think, for today. So it builds really directly on my talk that I gave in December, if you were on our last webinar, when I was talking about the devolution data deficit. And in that presentation, I was saying that the ambition for government's place-based policy is slightly running ahead of the evidence and perhaps even the theoretical knowledge that we've got or that's needed to support it. So you might remember, a great one for recycling slides, as all my colleagues will tell you. If you were at the presentation in December, you'll remember this slide. And you know, it's simplest, Pride in Place. It's a long-term place-based programme, and it combines sustained funding with expectations of very local leadership, and it's a shift away from this short-term competitive bidding that we sort of associated with the last government. And in parallel, as I mentioned before, we've got the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, which is enabling a whole load of new local leadership infrastructure at a level below the local authority. So very much a place-based level, actual town centres, neighbourhoods, secondary shopping parades, and so on. So this is the problem, really, that government wants these place-based policies to solve. And Pride in Place aims to rebuild pride, belonging, confidence through focusing on everyday environments, changing what people can see and feel. And all that language is aspirations from the Pride in Place's perspective itself, the strategy document you can get off gov.uk, or I've taken it from speeches by the Secretary of State or Prime Minister. You might have heard him speaking at the weekend. And more recently, illustrated by my AI doctored image there's been far more of an emphasis on how this policy will restore trust and control. So it's definitely about local places and making them better, but there's definitely that feeling of like inclusivity, belonging, taking back control. And so what's distinctive, I think, is the policy is very much talking, as I said, about how places feel, pride, belonging, confidence, empowering, inclusive. And these aren't sort of side effects of this policy. They're central policy objectives. And here's another AI generated image. And I just asked it to use the Institute of Place Management playbook for making a vital and viable neighbourhood centre. And so that's what it came up with. So the idea, with this sort of like long-term funding, putting the community in charge, this is how Pride in Place could potentially transform a neighbourhood centre. So let's have a look at the policy a little bit more in detail. In a nutshell, 244 places are being, and the number of places sort of varies, but this was that was a response to a question to Secretary of State. So that's got this from Hansard. So 244 places are being offered long-term flexible investment, political backing for their decision making, all for like £5 billion of public investment. And in return, the Pride in Place places are expected to put governance in place through a neighbourhood, place-based board with an independent chair, broad representation of people involved, work collaboratively, residents, business, public sector, private sector, and so on. They'll need to demonstrate what they can do about local priorities. And that means a focus on visible, everyday changes that sort of incrementally show progress over time. So not like the waiting 5 years for the big, shiny capital project, but, what's going on in the meantime that's making a difference to real issues that local people are concerned about. So it's in this policy, those conditions are as important as the funding itself. I mean, yes, the media will jump onto the like £20 million for 10 years. Obviously, local papers about if that's about your town centre or high street, that's very much a headline stat. But really, what's driving this policy is local government, local leadership, and then a focus on delivery. And Pride in Place doesn't emerge from nowhere. It sits at the end of several decades, really, of place-based policy, learning from long-term area in focused initiatives like the single regeneration budget. I mean, this is pretty much the timeline of my career as well. UK place-based policy coincided with like 1997 when I started researching in this area. And then, you know, we go through that sort of like tranche of sort of very much place-based funding, but with the competitive, you know, the competitive pots. And then out the other end of that, we're getting something that's more aligned with sort of devolution and neighbourhoods, current local, current sort of localism sort of agendas from government. Sorry, just moving on. And as I said, what's different here is not just the funding model, but the impact on people. Pride in Place is less about what's getting built and more about what people experience in everyday lives and how they work together to make a difference. So it is quite different, and I've got to be honest and say it's a big ask here. I've been studying high street and town centre regeneration for 30 years nearly. Government at all levels has been unable to do this. That's why we've got the sort of centres that we've got and the problems that we've got. And neither have the private sector actors, the property owners, the corporates, major retailers. So we've got this, you know, people say we're not happy with these centres, we're not happy with these focuses for local places. And now we're asking local people in neighbourhood boards to fix that. So I think that's an incredibly big ask. So I just wanted to jump in quickly and talk to you about the High Street Task Force, because we've got some sort of form in this space, 5-year programme commissioned by MHCLG. We provided expert knowledge and support to 150 local places across England. I was a research lead, and Chloe, who you'll hear from later, was one of the research team, and IPM at Manchester Met led the consortium. It proved without a shadow of a doubt that, you know, the sort of core of this policy, which is about trusting local people, is makes sense. There's no doubt it's people that makes places, and that their efforts, underpinned by some knowledge, expert guidance, funding, is what transforms places. So, you know, we think we like this policy. At the end of the task force, it's like the biggest sort of data set that we've got in supporting local people transform sort of local places. We generated a legacy theory of change, which I shared with the then Secretary of State back in March. And I think a lot of the findings and experience from the task force have impacted Pride in Place policy. There's a link there to the findings if you want to have a look. And that's what I'm just going to end on now, as a way to sort of like couch what you're going to hear next, but also think more generally about the evidence and sort of theory gaps in Pride in Place. And I'm not presenting this as a normative or an ideal model. I'm presenting it as a sort of empirically grounded synthesis, if you like, of the realities of what it means to make vital and viable places when they're, you know, lots of it in quite advanced stages of decline. It brings together a lot of strands of theory, and so I'm speaking to you as a researchers. It might help for you to position your research within this agenda, and by doing that, we might be able to improve the implementation and evaluation of Pride in Place policy, which I think would be a really good idea. It's like I say, it has real potential. So down there at the bottom are the questions of capacity and capability, and this is our sort of home ground of place management. Definitely, you know, we're familiar with the sort of, you know, an organisational theory and also public administration theory, understanding why some local authorities and local places can act while others struggle. The second layer is about the partnerships and building inclusive networks. So that's where, you know, theory around social capital, community development, collective efficacy comes in to explain how individual actors work together, and that how they work together as a sort of core part of, you know, making better places. So the focus today, though, through the rest of our speakers, is on that third level, improving experience and identity. Are, you know, drawing from human geography, affective and emotional geographies, place attachment, place identity, all the way through to placemaking as a lived practice, festivals, events, activation of place, and so on. So this is where Pride in Place is really most explicit, and today's webinar is firmly anchored in that. And then just to finish off at the top there, questions about hyperlocal government and place leadership. That's the literatures on adaptive and experimentalist governance, which I'm sure for many of you in regional studies will be, you know, that's home ground for you. How does that shape direction and continuity of these groups over time? But today we're deliberately narrowing the lens of the methods to research that sort of third level. So we understand people's emotional experience of place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cathy. And we're moving on to Rebecca.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm going to pick up the baton if I can, I think, from Cathy and try and put a provocation in place, I suppose, about how we release the untapped potential of Pride in Place. And so to achieve that, hopefully what I'll do today is share with you some of the work of the HRC Place programme, which is a long-term strategic investment by both HRC and UKRI that works with partners from across the public and private sector to advance what we call people-centred place-based approaches. And crucially, the one thing that I'd like you to take from today, if you can, is that our programme demonstrates that Pride can be a helpful starting point, but not the destination for place-based policies and practices that seek to secure those improved socioeconomic outcomes. And this turn to Pride in Place across successive UK governments is pleasing, as it starts to recognise that economic growth won't just be seen on spreadsheets and conveyed through statistics, but crucially it'll be felt by each of us in our everyday lives. But if, as Rachel Reeves says on the slide here, the renewal of Britain is to be felt everywhere, then in the programme we suggest that we need to have a much more explicit way of surfacing, working with and valuing the felt dimensions of everyday life. And I think this is primarily because pride's not the only feeling that we have in place, and nor will pride by itself be the panacea to solving entrenched socioeconomic issues. And so my provocation really is to say, can we see pride as nested within a much larger set of a conceptual framework called felt experiences of place? And to show how widening this lens perhaps helps us to collectively design and deliver place-based policies and practices that can improve lives and livelihoods. And I'm going to do this provocation in three particular ways. Firstly, I'm going to say, if we think in this way about this widened lens, can we provide a different and more robust evidence base that can then help us to enable us to design and deliver different kinds of place-based policies and practices? So on to the first one for today, thinking. In the programme, as I said, we start from the kind of affective and emotional dimensions of place, and we bring this together under the concept and framework of felt experiences of place. And the definition you can see on the slide is deliberately very broad and very simple. And it's broad and simple so as to reflect and respect the established disciplinary traditions in the areas, some of which Cathy mentioned earlier on in her talk. The definition is, however, rooted in established and very complex academic findings. And so rather than go through all those in details, I want to cut through with you how we arrived at this simple but hopefully inclusive definition. And so firstly, through an examination of the literature on space and place. So for many of you on this call, you'll probably know all of this. And so to cut a very long story short, space is generally defined as a geographic location and place is a meaningful geographic location. And within that definition, the word meaningful is crucial for us because we know that humans need relationships with meaningful places almost as much as they need them with other people. So this need for meaning and place is both an existential and everyday need. And so in the programme, we started to think about, well, where does that meaning come from? And so we see meaning as deriving from our everyday feelings and experiences in and of place. And that's how we've got to this kind of umbrella conceptual framework of felt experiences that helps us to interrogate how space becomes place or becomes meaningful. And secondly, through an examination of the literature on people-place relations. And I put this on the slide, a piece of work that Michael Howcroft did as part of the programme a couple of years ago, to just show the kind of rich and complex and sometimes quite overwhelming different definitions that people use around affective and emotional dimensions of people-place relationships. So there's a huge panoply of terms, and there's also huge tensions between disciplines and different traditions. And so what we don't perhaps have is a consistent conceptual, linguistic, or even indeed methodological framework. And this is fine within academic circles, it's part of the richness of what we do, but I think it cannot continue to be the case when we're thinking about this affective turn in policy. In reality, we experience these places through our minds and bodies and all of our senses. And as such, we cannot separate atmosphere from affect or emotion, or divorce this from wider considerations about belonging. And so felt experience is an attempt, if you like, to reject this silo working and to see the potential in bringing lots of different disciplinary areas together in the hope that this collective approach can kind of provide some of that knowledge and theory that Cathy alluded to earlier. And this becomes even more important when we start to think about the second of the three areas of today's talk. We start to think about how this kind of framework might help us evidence improved socioeconomic outcomes. Is pride the sole outcome that we desire from this programme and this affective turn in policy? Or is it merely a mechanism towards other kinds of outcomes? And so we started with that question in the programme, to then think about what kinds of evidence that we could collect to make that direct relationship or that direct link between felt experiences and particular kinds of socioeconomic outcomes. And so to do that, we couldn't cope with everything on that previous slide. So we focused on three established academic areas that are also cited in policy: attachment, belonging, and pride. And that enabled us to do what Sarah Ahmed first brilliantly said: what do emotions do? What do they help us achieve, both for people and place? And the outcomes showed us two main things of that evidence review. Firstly, there's a huge range of different socioeconomic outcomes that are related to attachment, belonging, and pride. And they sit at both individual and societal levels. And they cut across arts, humanities, social, and other sciences as well. So there's lots of people working on this with lots of fantastic evidence for us to develop on further. But secondly, it also showed us that felt experiences aren't just an outcome, but are also and instead intimately connected to how we act in place. So we might do things like engage in particular community activities or planning, or engage in place protective behaviour or place stewardship. But they determine the kinds of effects that we might see in place by our ethic of care and the way that we might act. So this knowledge enables us to work with our place programme partners to hopefully design and deliver place-based policies and practices that can work productively with felt experiences. And here I'll finish on the third and final aspect of the talk today. How does this evidence base help us to think and do differently within the context of this affective turn? I'd suggest we have the policy, we have some of the framing and some of the evidence, but the delivery, as Cathy says, will remain challenging. So I'll finish by outlining two brief examples of how we've worked with our AHRC Place Programme partners to tackle two key issues in delivery. The first one was that we worked with National Lottery Heritage Fund and Historic Environment Scotland and 5 local authority areas across Scotland to see how we could embed an understanding of felt experiences across the development and delivery of large-scale heritage-led regeneration initiatives. We achieved this by coming up with a bespoke set of felt experience methods, such as emojis, that crucially were fun, inclusive, and inexpensive ways to understand that widened emotional register of place at all stages of regeneration. And so crucially, the resource kit does not just outline methods for data collection, but also how to analyse that data, and shows how this analysis could inform decisions across the development cycle and not just bolted on at the end. So hopefully that helps us think about the delivery and embedding felt experiences within place-based policies, not just as an evaluative framework. And the second one is we know just how difficult it is to consider emotions within current economic frameworks. And so we work with Historic England to see how this reframing of inputs and outcomes could be considered within emergent thinking in DCMS in the context of their cultural heritage capital framework. And that's what you can see at the top of this slide. And we took that framework and we started to think where we could insert felt experiences. And so here, felt experiences of place are conceptualized as flows of services within the cascade model of cultural heritage as an economic capital. They're identity and experiential services that underpin the reasons why, in this case, historic places can and do improve lives and livelihoods, and also crucially a mechanism through which benefits can be improved. The model therefore not just helps us quantify outcomes, but also to understand the mechanisms through which such outcomes can be optimized. And so I'll conclude by saying that all the evidence for the talk and longer, more detailed explanations can be found on our website. However, I hope that for now, it's possible to see that how we can start and move beyond pride and embrace felt experiences as input, process or mechanism, and outcome. If we can do this, then I think we can release that untapped potential of the affective turn by working in partnership to embed felt experiences within place-based policies and practices in ways that can hopefully secure improved socioeconomic outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was a perfect summary of where we are now in research and methodology and how we need those in our arsenal to affect policy change. And it's a perfect also bridge to Chloe's research, who is going to give us the some of the exact methodological tools that researchers can use to achieve those aims and potentially impact policy further down the line.
Okay, Jenny, can you see my slides okay and you can hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, so I think that was a great foundation provided by both Cathy and Rebecca, and hopefully I'm going to build on that, as Jenny said, from a more, I guess, methodological perspective, building on what Rebecca was just saying about the delivery side of things. So are said to have undergone an effective turn in place-based policy, where practitioners and policymakers are becoming increasingly interested in better understanding and also measuring people's emotional responses and connections to place. And I think this effective turn is obviously very well reflected in the government's refreshed Pride in Place strategy, which is obviously at the heart of today's webinar. And in the Pride in Place strategy document, MHCLG notes how they want to enhance or restore people's feelings of pride in their locations, their local high streets and town centres, but also to enhance feelings of belonging and also feelings of safety. They note that all places should have strong relationships and a collective sense of belonging to their community. This helps bring people together to build community cohesion and resilience, helping people to feel proud of their area and feel safe in their neighbourhood. However, there's a lot of ongoing debate and discussion. People on the webinar have probably been having these discussions yourselves about the most effective way of actually measuring and capturing people's feelings or emotional feelings within their places. And there has been a bit of critique of existing measures and metrics, which often use, I guess, quantitative questionnaires to measure things like people's area satisfaction, their feelings of belonging, their engagement within civic participation, often through quantitative questionnaires like the Community Life Survey. But as MHCLG themselves remark, the measures of success cannot just be shifts in national statistics, but must include change that people see and feel in their local community. So this very much raises the question to me whether we could actually combine existing metrics and measures, but perhaps more innovative or creative methodologies as well, which is something I'll reflect on in today's presentation. So my research specifically focuses on place atmosphere, which, just like Pride in Place, highly relates to people's emotional connections and experiences within places, because atmosphere is a spatially extended feeling. Atmospheres refer to the ways that places feel to us emotionally, affectively, and sensorially. But just like the concept of Pride in Place, atmosphere has also been identified as something difficult to research empirically, because atmospheres, they're dynamic, they don't stand still, it's difficult to pin down for analysis. They're also a bit intangible, so they're not as easily grasped or seen as other more tangible concepts we might be a bit more used to researching. And just like Lord Voldemort here, atmospheres also comprise some non-representational qualities. They can be difficult to put a label on or write up in our research projects. So what do we do about this conundrum? Well, research I did with Loretta Litworth from Manchester Met University last year sought to find out which methods are most effective for researching atmospheres on the British High Street. In order to interrogate our key research question here, we started off with a scoping literature review, where both myself and Loretta reviewed existing work around methods for researching atmospheres and also people's sensory experiences of place more generally. Based on our findings from this literature review, we were able to identify 6 key creative and sensory methods we thought might have some value for researching atmospheres on our high streets. These being drawing and mapping, photography, poetry, sensory participation, smell walks, and sound walks. So myself and Loretta, we both trialled each of these methods ourselves down a British high street. And we also reflected on these experiences of the methods in ongoing diaries we both kept. And we trialled them with 10 local participants to a British high street, who were all asked to select one of these 6 methods for trialling on an hour-long walk along the high street with myself and Loretta, followed by a group discussion we had at the town hall to further reflect on what they learnt about these methods and if they found them effective or how they might improve them. The case study location we all tried these methods out on was Altrincham High Street in Greater Manchester, which is a past recipient of the Great British High Street Award. If you're not familiar with Altrincham, it once had a lot of negative press attention, a lot of negative media coverage, negative perceptions. It was referred to as being a ghost town. There was lots of high levels of vacancy on the high street. But over recent decades, it's sort of really changed its fortunes around. It reinvented itself as the modern market town, and it's now known as being a very actually vibrant and viable high street, which is why we selected it as our case study. So because of time, today I'm just going to select one of the methods we learnt about in our project and reveal what value it might have for accessing people's emotional perceptions and experiences of places. So this is drawing and mapping. In our project, we created personal affective maps of the high street. I'm not claiming to be an artist here, but the one on the slide here is the map that I created. And it shows you don't have to be an artist to use this method, definitely not. But it helps you to capture visually how different areas of the high street might feel slightly differently. So on my map here, you can see that the main market area had quite a vibrant feel, a quite lively feel, almost a European coffee culture vibe, whereas the main high street with the chain stores, with the sale signs up, felt a bit more sanitized and corporate. There's lots of different types of mapping and drawing techniques, but this is quite flexible. As I remark in my research diary, feeling constrained by the representational map of Altrincham and that I was drawing things in the wrong places, I instead decided to draw my own affective map. It felt like a much more flexible approach to mapping. Another way you can use mapping techniques, which Rebecca mentioned briefly before, is the use of emoji mapping, which is also useful for probing into people's emotional experiences of place. This has been developed by Rebecca and colleagues in the Feeling Town project. And with this technique, you ask participants to put emoji stickers onto a hand-drawn map of their high street or place, or a printed out one, again to visually represent how different areas might feel slightly differently. And we've been trialling this technique at the Institute of Place Management. We're currently doing some research in Norway. So this method's also now gone international, and it's actually been working very well in that research project as well. So overall, what we learned about drawing and mapping is it's a flexible method. It can be adapted for different skills and preferences. There's lots of different ways of doing mapping techniques. You can combine text with images, with photos and so on. So it's quite useful in that respect. It helps to communicate insights to diverse audiences in engaging ways. It's quite a visual method. You can take photographs, share photographs of maps. You can also create digital maps, which you can even make dynamic and put onto research websites, sharing on social media. However, it can be a bit anxiety provoking if the participant doesn't feel artistic. They might feel like they put too much effort in trying to master, really good drawings of a high street, rather than using the method to represent how it feels to them. And also participants can sometimes revert to more representational drawings of what can be seen rather than how the high street feels. So taken overall, thinking about these 6 methods we learned, there's 3 key takeaway learnings for us as the research team. First is that people have different and dynamic methodological comfort zones, or discomfort zones as we call them. Some methods can feel more comfortable to use than others. It can impact what methods people choose to use. It can impact how the methods are used. And also sometimes people make subtle adaptations to methods to make them feel more comfortable, such as adding text onto their drawings or maps. Second, we found these methods aren't always fully weatherproof, particularly when used in outdoor spaces like a British high street where paper can go soggy from the rain, pens and papers can blow over in the wind. So there's different ways you can sort of try and weatherproof these methods, bringing plastic sheets to cover paper, digitizing methods, so something else to consider. And third, sensory and creative methods are really useful for tuning into the emotional and atmospheric qualities of place, which can sometimes fade into the background of our busy daily lives. But they can be compromised if you're using them in a very busy place that's very sensorially overwhelming. It can be compromised, their use. And sometimes there can be competition between the senses, where the visual can sometimes overpower smells, textures, sounds, and so on. In conclusion then, our research confirms what Halcroft and colleagues say here. There is a need for more critical research on capturing, representing and measuring the felt experiences of place. Obviously, some people like Rebecca, myself, others are obviously doing this. But I think there's perhaps room for combining existing measures and metrics and quantitative techniques with the more qualitative, sensory and creative side. Could we sort of combine these together in new ways? So myself and Loretta have integrated our insights into these 6 methods into a series of atmospheric methods guides. They give practical tips. They can be used in research, practice and teaching. I'll put a link to these in the chat if anybody's interested in checking them out. There's also a QR code at the end. And we've also disseminated our research through the following journal article in Marketing Theory. This article gives more insight, I guess, into the theoretical underpinnings of our research here. It's open access, free for anybody to access online. Again, I can pop it into the chat. Otherwise, the QR code's there to our guides if anybody's interested in checking them out. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end once we've heard from Ilze. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chloe. I can see the Q&A is firing up, so I will keep everything condensed at the end. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Ilze, taking this scalar approach to our presentation today, from the broader to the down to the more specific, the latest research project funded by British Academy Early Career Network, Researcher Network on UK High Street micro and small enterprises.
Okay, so I want to now take this bigger picture that was presented by Cathy, Rebecca, and Chloe and look at it through the lens of one specific stakeholder, which is independent small and micro businesses on high streets. So, when we talk about the UK economy, small and micro independent businesses are often treated as peripheral, but in reality, they are central to how the economy works. In 2024, they made up over 80% of UK employer firms and supported around 4.2 million jobs. Yet, despite this scale, their role is still undervalued, partly because policy tends to measure success through a big business lens. Research consistently shows that independent high street businesses are important to the vitality, identity, and long-term sustainability of the high street. Yet, high streets' success is still commonly measured by the presence of national chains, which means small independents are often overlooked in regeneration priorities. The sector is also highly fragmented, scattered, without a strong collective voice, which is why they are often described as hard to reach. My research, however, suggests this is less about disengagement and more about the fact that existing engagement mechanisms simply don't fit the realities of everyday small business life. This creates a core tension. Small and micro independent businesses are collectively essential to the high street, yet individually constrained and poorly represented in decision making. Building on that context, I want to understand how small and micro independent businesses actually operate in everyday practice, how they stay competitive on the high street, generate income, and try to innovate. Also, what are the challenges and opportunities they face? I approach this project from the experience economy perspective, using the experience design lens to explore how businesses create value for their customers and whether or if that value is built into their business strategies and digital practices. Just to explain, by experience economy, I mean the idea that customers today are not just looking for mere convenience, simply more goods and services, but are willing to spend their time, attention, and money on meaningful and memorable experiences. So, in that sense, experiences become a key source for value creation and one of the main ways businesses can stay competitive, generate profit, and attract customers. Methodologically, this study uses a qualitative research design with a strong ethnographic orientation. I chose this approach because I wanted to understand not just what business owners say they do, but also observe the business in action, how their physical shops feel, what's the experience. This allowed conversations to be grounded in the material, spatial, and social realities of the business. In total, I conducted 28 in-depth interviews with small and micro independent businesses. The research deliberately targeted businesses that were locally recognized for best practice in customer experience. I also recorded field notes and took photographs to capture store layouts, experiential touchpoints, and the spatial context in which customer experiences are designed and delivered. This research was conducted across 6 UK places. This allowed me to interview businesses across different types of UK high streets. While the multiple site approach wasn't planned initially, it really highlighted the importance of place, which I will talk a little bit in a moment. Turning now to key findings on how experiences are designed in small and micro independent businesses. Many micro businesses start out as a passion or lifestyle choice. Owners tend to be driven by creative interests, personal values, or craft skills, rather than by formal management approaches or strategic business planning. As a result, experience design tends to emerge organically. Early decisions are often shaped by trial and error and learning by doing, with owners experimenting, adapting, and refining their practices over time. Decisions are frequently guided by customer reactions and personal intuition, rather than by structured planning or formal design tools, which were often reported by interviewees as unfamiliar, time consuming, or difficult to engage with. This doesn't mean that businesses lack ambition or insights. In fact, the experiences they create are often rich, distinctive, and highly valued by customers. They are seasonal, themed, and entertaining. They add to local vibrancy, create diversity in the community, and bring unique charm and character to the high streets. Teach people new skills and provide information that customers value. Also create opportunities for customers to engage practically in different experiences. For example, allow families escape into fairy tale or Easter trails, or immerse themselves in Halloween themed events. However, while these practices create rich experiences for customers, they are not always designed to generate additional revenue and are often not embedded strategically within the business. An important contrast, however, emerges between business owners with formal business education or experience in larger or corporate organizations. They tend to operate more confidently, apply established business skills, and report fewer challenges in linking experience design to pricing, planning, and long-term strategy. Taken together, these findings help explain why experience design is so strong creatively, yet often poorly connected to strategic planning, a tension that becomes even more pronounced when we consider the role of place and networks, which I'll turn to next. Looking across the different sites, clear differences emerges in how place leadership and coordination were experienced by businesses. In some location, businesses described visible place management and structures and regular communications. In these contexts, owners were more aware of local initiatives and were more likely to engage in collective activity on their high street. In other places, however, businesses reported little awareness of any formal support, guidance, or coordination from local authorities, trade groups, or place-based organization. Interestingly, it is not just about formal leadership. There were places where high street vitality was sustained through informal, small-scale, place-based collaborations. There, businesses actively promoted one another, coordinated local events, or experiential trails and shared information. Of course, place leadership is only part of the picture. Other factors, such as the high street's built environment and its wider social spatial context, also play an important role in shaping business practices, customer experiences, and ultimately the business success. This takes me to the final slide. So to conclude, this research highlights how experience design is not just an individual business activity. It is shaped by place, leadership, and the networks that connect businesses to one another and to wider place-based structures. Small and micro independent businesses create rich experiential value, but on their own, they often lack the capacity, visibility, or support to sustain and scale that value over time. What makes a difference is when individual efforts are connected through networks and partnerships. This leads me directly to the next stage of my research. I want to focus on identifying and understanding the networks that already exist on high streets, both formal and informal, direct and indirect, and examine where there are gaps and weak connections or exclusions. By mapping these networks, I want to identify opportunities for joint activities, shared resources, and collaborations so that experience ecosystems on the high street and innovation at the individual business level can be better understood. Thank you. That's everything from me.
Thank you very much, Ilze. That was very representative of how the whole discussion evolved today. And I'm very happy that we had this opportunity to hear from all of you and see how rewarding but also difficult pride in place can be, as much as a noble aim as it is. There's a lot of issues that are popping up not only in your presentations but also in the Q&A. And now I'm going to ask everyone here to do the absolute impossible in academic terms, which would be to provide succinct answers to the very, very interesting questions that I have to read out. Thankfully, some of the presenters have already started typing in their answers, in which case I will ask you to read out your answer for the rest of the participants. Way easier. So by order of speaker and how the answers have been provided, questions and answers have been asked, the first one from Jean Ball to Cathy: how can the places that are not getting pride in place funding avoid falling behind? Cathy, could you please summarize your answer for us?
Here we go. Okay, right. So yeah, read the High Street Task Force Legacy Theory of Change. There's a sort of route map in there for sort of what needs doing, and you don't need funding or policies for that. we need place leadership organisations, regional authorities, combined authorities, to be thinking, what do they need to do to enable this type of work, and get on with it. I think so. That's my answer, and I hope Jean will like that answer.
And since you're here, to follow up exactly from this, is Pride in Place partly addressing the damage caused by underfunding of local authorities?
Yeah, so I put another answer there. Yes, and got lots of evidence of that from the High Street Task Force. The problem is that if you identify that as an issue, you really do need to make sure that policy addresses that issue. And I mean, we need to repair a lot of capacity and capability in place ecosystems, and this doesn't necessarily guarantee that. I'm not saying it wouldn't do it, but I think we need a bit more sort of guidance and support, as we did on the task force, so that the sort of the impact people expect to see, people get a bit of help for actually doing that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cathy. I hope everybody can see the more detailed answer provided in the Q&A. I'm going to move on to Rebecca's targeted question, but as other questions about methodologies and effect theory pop up, then obviously we can have a broader discussion from a methodological perspective. But from Graham to Rebecca, is this fallacious when places have yet again been selected by central government with the best intentions, but funding places where locals are not identifying?
Yeah, good. And I think just following up on that, I think in the chat as well, Graham, I think I was wondering which bit of the presentation you thought you wanted me to address, but I'm guessing it's in the place selection bit. So I think you're completely right. It depends on what level of devolution the current emotional regime are happy with, I suppose. And so for me, that would be the first part of that question is this a staged thing? We might see this coming in further down the line once it's proven itself. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a framework of thinking that we're sitting within. But I would say within that resource kit that we developed with the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Historic Environment Scotland, we have it, when I said it works across the different timelines of the development cycle. The first one that we actually have is how you might prioritise places based on how people already feel. So we have a framework, and I'm sure lots of other people have the same framework to deliver this in policies and practices. But I think actually that, for me, my hypothesis would be from the evidence we've seen so far, that if you start from the places that matter to people, that then has a positive effect on their attachment, which in effect can then be secure higher income and improve socioeconomic outcomes at the end. So that was a very brief response. I hope that was okay.
Yeah, we're doing really well that front so far. So I'm going to ask directly the next question to Chloe, but then I think we will circle back anyway to methodologies. So and also, to be honest, even though it's for Chloe, it goes for everyone when we're discussing the question of inclusivity, when we consider atmosphere and pride in place. I'm going to just, the question also proceeds to ask how might developing pride for some people alienate others and so forth. But I want to leave as an umbrella for now, inclusivity in atmosphere and pride in place, and perhaps inclusivity in pride in place as an aim through atmospheres. Chloe and Rebecca, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so reading the question, I think, yeah, absolutely. Inclusivity is really important to consider when designing atmospheres or trying to create certain feels or atmospheres in a place like a high street through design decisions, urban design, for example. I think it links to the academic concept of ambient power, which recognises how the way places are designed can make some people feel welcomed and included, whilst leading other social groups to perhaps feeling unwelcomed and excluded. It works in more subtle ways than more explicit behavioural control measures. It's not people actually pushing people out of places physically, but the way places are subtly designed can definitely lead to feelings of exclusivity for some social groups. I think it comes back to the idea that it's important for a wide variety of people and local communities to become involved in designing their places rather than it be done in a very top-down or imposed ways. And I think that's what the Pride and Place strategy is aiming to do, sort of include those local voices, but also looking at including some missing voices. So the High Streets Task Force project that Cathy mentioned, the research we did for 5 years on England's high streets, we often found young people's voices are missing from these discussions about how their high street or town centre should be designed or the future of their place. So I think it's also about including a diversity of voices in those discussions about the future of places. And I think that to some extent will lead to more inclusive atmospheres or inclusive fields, but how that works in practice, I guess, is still to be discussed.
Yeah. Rebecca, would you like to add
Yeah,
something?
just very quickly, I think Chloe covered it all. I would just say that what we tried to do when we were thinking about our kind of emotional methodologies that we might use, whether that was in the resource kit or in other research projects, was that we started to think about inclusive forms of communication. So not everybody communicates in the same way or feels comfortable, and Chloe's presentation was really attuned to that with the kind of artistic style of it. But what I would say is that in road testing the emojis, what we were able to do is both get that individual emotional response that could be anonymous because you're just putting a kind of emoji somewhere or you're clicking a button. So you could have that anonymized response where your voice was individually heard. But we also felt that it wasn't a statistical exercise for us. It wasn't that, 100% of people felt happy in this place. It was actually more of a mechanism to stimulate conversation. And in that stimulation of conversation, what you often found is that people would change their emoji response, how they felt having listened to others. And so it became not a collective consensus. You're never going to get that. But I think what it did was it enabled people to start having a shared awareness of how different people experience different spaces differently. And so for us, it was a very positive methodology in raising some of those kinds of complexity issues.
Yeah, I think that's important. And coming back to the methods, is sort of using these more creative methods such as emoji mapping or other methods as well can be used, as Rebecca said, as a useful prompt or elicitation device to prompt discussion between different groups that may not usually speak together. So the outputs from using these more creative or sensory methods are often can be quite visual, or things that can be used as a prompt or an elicitation tool to prompt that discussion. So I agree with what Rebecca said. I found that in my own research as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Ilze's targeted questions, and then I'll try to do my best to bring together the more general ones. So Ilze, are you able to see the questions that are
Yes, I can see
directly
the
pointing
questions.
out to you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you would like to go straight at it,
Yes,
question
I will
answer.
go
Yeah,
straight
perfect.
into this. Yes. So in terms of the first question that Harry asked, I don't have an answer yet to that question, to be honest. This is kind of evolving research project, and I see it as a next stage. Looking at what business improvement districts could be able to do to represent the small and micro businesses better. And I even copied the question for myself because I think these are kind of summarizes the key questions here. So what is important, for me to look at more specifically. In terms of Jennifer's question, thank you for this question. At this stage where I am right now in my research, I believe that partnerships and collaborations, so these networks, could help here, so that not all the pressure is on the small businesses to create those experiences, but if there were shared resources, different shared activities, and collaborations, then I think that would, at least at this stage of my research, I think that might be a solution. But again, this is something that I want to research further at how it works and how it can support, how it could support the small and micro businesses.
I want to move on directly because I don't know how much time we have and people might want to start leaving. We can stay a few more minutes, but just to make sure that we don't leave the discussion hanging, I want to raise the question that Abigail has asked and Cathy has answered in writing, but I want to give the opportunity to everyone to consider a little bit this question. Abigail asks, I'm interested in whether the presenters see particular potential in the Pride in Place program for improving processes and partnerships that stretch from hyperlocal to national, away from questions of evidence in the experiential or on the particular metrics through which investment is allocated. Whilst we need to build better place-based business cases, how can national programs share learning to sustain place-based policy in all places? And how can this overcome the issues of multi-level governance and patchy devolution? So if people can summarize their thoughts on this.
I think
I
Cathy
mean,
probably has
yeah, I did put an answer in the chat, which is just writing up the task force findings, which was for sort of a huge large-scale experiment really in public policy that enables this sort of place-based working and learning. And what was interesting about it was that knowledge transferred from the local to the national more than the other way round. You know, it wasn't a program that was designed in that way. So we've got a case that seemed to work. I'm writing that up at the moment to try and understand the mechanisms within that case. Why did it work? So I think there's an awful lot we can learn in there about interscalar governance and devolution. So anyone that's interested, my email, I'll just get that in the chat. We're putting together an SRC bid at the moment to sort of build on the findings of the task force and think about this sort of like experiments in learning as policy to build this capacity capability for places. So be delighted to hear from anyone that's interested in that, and maybe we'll have a follow-up session, a bit of a, you know, sandpit or something, whatever we call these things nowadays, to try and think about, you know, how we build theory in this area.
If nobody else has more answers for this, last but not least, if we are allowed to, I want to address the question by Jennifer Body asking something very crucial, I think. Are we not, throughout Pride in Place, the program, or through Ilze's, I'm taking Ilze's project as a hook for this question, but more generally, how are we not overburdening micro businesses with the hyperlocal with the responsibility for providing community value? Because it is the other side of the coin of hyperlocal governance, perhaps. Is this something that we have measured or that we consider important? It is by Jennifer Body, the question, how do you imagine Pride in Place supporting this rather than overburdening micro businesses? But I want to extend a little bit, ask about the hyperlocal governance more broadly with this, with the responsibility for providing community value.
I think probably it does best to answer that one, maybe. Because
do you want me to answer that question? Yeah. Okay. Well, the way how I so how I see it, in order not to overburden these micro businesses, we should more rely, or these networks and partnerships should become more visible for the micro businesses. And in that way, if there is support or partnerships between not just local businesses and maybe further going to bids and local councils, and then maybe indirect partnerships and networks with regional organizations, and maybe indirect then of course networks with national organizations. So if there is broader networks of support for those micro and small businesses, then in that way the Pride in Place efforts and the experience design and the experiences that are provided by the small and micro businesses are then shared. I don't know. Does that make sense? My thoughts kind of trail here.
Yes, because we are entering the more theoretical realm. So if anyone could conclude, everyone could conclude with a thought on this, or a broader concluding thought to share before we disengage our audience for today, that would be great.
I think, yeah, building on what Ilze said, I think we found that from the High Streets Task Force project, that these partnerships, networks, they're integral to the performance of places like high streets and town centres. It can't be put on the shoulders, this massive task on one type of group or one stakeholder. It has to be a collective effort. And we found in the High Streets Task Force, not all places have that same level of networks or partnership workers or local capacity. So we do actually have to try and enhance that partnership working in networks in order for a strategy like this to actually work in practice, I think. But yeah, that's my concluding thoughts on that question.
And if I may, that also links, I can see Kevin has also asked a question about if there are links about larger firms and smaller firms, and in different places, my interview showed that, you know, the larger firms can sometimes be anchors of the high street, so they bring more footfall to the high streets, and that is how the smaller firms can also benefit from that footfall. So they are not necessarily competitors always. They can be partners as well in that high street ecosystem.
Rebecca and Cathy? Rebecca, Cathy, whoever wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, I started like in this work working with sort of a lot of multiple retailers that were completely place blind. You know, that they were established in lots of places, but they didn't let their store managers and area managers get involved in local initiatives and so on. So that's not the there's barriers and issues that you have to overcome, with larger players as well as the smaller ones. So I just thought I'd add that in.
Yeah, and I think for me, just as a kind of takeaway from everything that I've heard and listened to today, and learned an awful lot. So thanks to the speakers and the questions for helping me learn. Is also just to think that pride in place and felt experiences are a form of expertise, and they're not something that can just be bolted on easily. There's a huge amount of research that lots of people have done over decades to try and kind of get to the heart of what these issues are, and they connect in, as Cathy said, to governance, they connect into economic frameworks, and I think it'll take a huge network of academics, different disciplines, working with policymakers and different types of practitioners and communities to try and get to the heart of it. So I think it very much is a very collaborative kind of take that we will need to adopt over the next few years to really deliver on what I think is the untapped potential. But I think it will take a very different way of working from all of us to achieve that.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you very much to all our speakers, the RSA and the IPM for hosting today. The recording will be made available through both RSA Lounge and the IPM network. But everyone, do feel free to reach out to participants individually. You do have the details from today's webinar posted through the RSA events page. And we look forward to having you all again at the next IPM RSA seminar and a few months from now. Keep an eye out for communications regarding that one. Thank you very much, everyone. It was very engaging and definitely the beginning of a broader conversation that not only we hope doesn't end, it should not end. Inclusivity, participation, how people feel about the high street and how proud they are in the local area and beyond is something that should be the crux of every policy, not just a mandate, a particular time and a particular place. So yes, let's keep this dialogue open. And thank you very much, and everyone at home or at the office. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.